political, what it really should mean is a sense of community. Of course, the word political is one of the words that comes from the ancient Greek word polis, which simply means the city. And so, polis to political, all things political are related to all things about the city or society, because, of course, the Greek civilization mostly thought in terms of the city-state. So from polis we get the idea of politics, and we get the idea of police, and we get the idea of the suffix of a city, a metropolis. Where I'm from, Minneapolis, is the name of a city of many waters. So what polis has come to mean for us today is anything related to the idea of government and society. We, of course, also have the word social, which comes from the Latin, which basically has to do with the sense of community. And we can talk about social philosophy as philosophy of human interactions, and that's slightly different but overlapping with political philosophy, which has to do with things about government. Politics itself is about governmental structure and, of course, the winning of elections and gaining power, and, of course, playing politics, which is a whole other nastiness. But in political philosophy, we don't really deal much, if at all, with questions about the actual structure of a political state or how elections are won. That is in the realm of something called political science. Political philosophy, like all branches of philosophy, is looking at the deeper, broader issues that lie behind the phenomena that we see in human social interactions. So the philosophy of the political is looking at what lies beneath the political phenomena that we see in various human societies. So while political science will ask the question, how is it that certain politicians win elections, or how is it that particular political parties wrest power from other particular political parties, political philosophy is looking at the questions of what are the meanings of political actions, what are the meanings of political motivations, what is it that we're really talking about when we talk about political action and political motivations. A seminal essay on this topic was written by philosopher Leo Strauss, published in 1957, entitled What is Political Philosophy? And he lays down two very important ways of looking at what is political and what is political philosophy when he talks about how all political actions aim at either preservation of existing circumstances or changes to existing political circumstances. And again, while political science may be talking about the nuts and bolts of analyzing particular ways in which parties or groups have tried to preserve or change political situations, philosophy looks at, well, what do we mean when we're talking about this? What does it mean to preserve political power? What does it mean to change political power? What does it mean for political or social situations to change for the better or change for the worse? And what are the principles and motivations that guide human beings, both as groups and as individuals, to want to preserve or change what is the current status quo within a society? And as Strauss very adeptly points out, all of this is dependent on the idea of the good. One of the important thoughts, which is fairly ignored by political science because they're only interested in the nuts and bolts issues because they're a science, not a philosophy, and actually lost in politics itself, is the very important reality that people who are involved in politics, however they are involved, are all guided by an ethical sense of what they believe is good. Ethical good. And that is what motivates their actions. Politics, of course, has always been, although seemingly especially today, dominated by just yelling at each other and demonizing your political opponents. The reality is that both sides of the people in the shouting match are believing that what they are trying to do is good, ethically good and ethically necessary. As I am doing this right now, there is a rather contentious election going on in the United States. And both sides think that the other side is completely evil and that they're completely good. Funny how they both believe that with complete sincerity. Nevertheless, what we as philosophers can do and need to do is look at this and say, okay, well, both sides do believe that they have the good on their side. This is what human beings do. And we have to keep that in mind as we are talking about politics and talking about society. So when in politics and in political philosophy we talk about such concepts as the good and justice and rights and liberty, we should be reminded that, oh, hey, yeah, Plato talked about these things, didn't he? It's so popular to just, oh, Plato, he's a weirdo, I don't like him at all. And yet he is framing the debate that still happens today because he first identified these very important concepts. Justice, rights, the good, liberty. These are concepts that transcend any particular philosopher or transcend any particular political party or movement. And when Strauss mentions how we're looking here for something that is no longer opinion but knowledge, there is the sticky wicket of, well, when do we really have knowledge as opposed to simply an opinion of what is good, what is justice, what are human rights? These, of course, are the questions that political philosophy tries to deal with. And so Plato tried to answer these questions, Aristotle tried to answer these questions, and now the philosophers that we're dealing with this week try to deal with those questions. But we're dealing with this question of what is political philosophy now as opposed to when we were talking about Plato and Aristotle, because there is some changes going on here in the mid to late 17th century and into the 18th century. And that is that the political order has broken down. I mentioned in the videos and lectures on the medieval period and the Renaissance period that political power was being transformed by events going on in the world. Philosophy is best when philosophy reacts to changes that are going on in the world. Philosophy helps us to explain and understand change. And as political values and institutions change, philosophy needs to reflect on that and take these changes into consideration of the discussion of what are we talking about when we talk about justice and rights and liberty and so on. And one of the chief changes that philosophy of this period has to deal with is this sudden change that political power changes, not just in terms of who is the king this year, but in terms of how the structure of political power can itself change. So when you look at some of these philosophers in this period of time, keep in mind that one of the things that they are trying to answer is that question of what does it mean for political structures to change, and why and how do political structures change? Again, as I mentioned in the lectures on medieval and the Renaissance period, the idea that political power was static, just like the universe itself was static, is a very old and ancient idea. It wasn't just Plato, it wasn't just Aristotle, it was embedded within human society, not just Western civilization either. But in the mid-17th century, you could see these structures which had been assumed to be inviolate to be changing. And of course, that was nothing compared to what was about to happen in the 18th century. Philosophers like Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau were prescient in seeing how these things can change and why these things can change. looking at these three philosophers, we see three very interesting and different approaches to these questions of what is political power, what is political structure, and of course, what are we meaning by rights and liberty and justice. And their struggles with these questions still reverberate within our world today. We can still see a Hobbesian, a Lockean, and a Rousseauian way of thinking about political society and acting within political society. And those three different approaches, and thus leading to three different sets of answers, is something that is very important for you to keep in mind when you are thinking about these philosophers and thinking about philosophy in the rest of this course, and of course thinking about society and politics in our world today. As Strauss also said quite wisely, philosophy is a quest for knowledge. And you may ask yourself constantly, why is it that philosophers are still arguing about these questions? Well, that's because humanity is still arguing about all of these questions. Not just about politics, but about knowledge, about ethics, about ontology, about everything. Why are we still arguing about everything? Because, as Strauss wisely points out, the quest would not be necessary if knowledge were immediately available. And it's not. Not just in terms of politics, but in terms of everything. The conversation of philosophy is continuous because the knowledge is not that easily obtained. And of course, and here's the annoying thing, the knowledge keeps changing because reality keeps changing. And so therefore, you, as a philosopher, as someone with a philosophical mind, needs to constantly adapt and change to the changes in your world. So then, back to the question, what is political philosophy? We're trying to deal with these questions of change in political and social structures. Why they change, how they changed, and what are the meaning of those changes. And that is central to the question of just about everything else that matters, that truly matters in human life.